Hey everybody, this is Matthew Kent. I'm so excited because today I get to talk about Harry Potter. Here's the thing, I love Harry Potter. I've been obsessed with this book series since I was 13. So it was the year 2000. I think the fourth book had just come out by the time I heard of it, and I was 13 years old and got the first book, read through it, immediately read it again, and then ran to my school library to see if they had any more. They had the second book, and so got that out, read that, reread it, and then I convinced my mom, true story, that, hey, we need to get these next book as quick as possible. She says, we're not going to have time all week to go out, so I said, we're going to order them online. She says, are we going to get ripped off? I'm like, listen, we won't go with one of those sketchy sites like Amazon. I don't know. It's some new thing I've never heard of. We'll use a reputable retailer, Borders.com, BarnesandNoble.com. We'll buy these books. They'll show up on our doorstep. Mom, I need to read these books. Fortunately, she listened to me. Those were our very first online purchases ever. Historical significance in my life. I've read these books through once a year. My copies are so beaten up that it's ridiculous. I actually already have purchased new copies, believe it or not. I got this gorgeous box set. The box looks like a Hogwarts trunk. I'll link to it below. You got to see it. It's amazing. If you're a Harry Potter nerd, it's like beautiful. And I plan on reading these books to my kids once they turn 5 years old. Right now we're reading all kinds of other little kids stories, but I think, at 5 they'll be able to handle Harry Potter, and I'm going to hook them on my obsession. You wait and see. So today I wanted to talk about something that I've thought about a ton. It's just been something I've always been so curious about, and that is exactly how many wizards are there in the world? How many wizards were there in Great Britain at the time that Harry Potter was going to school? How many wizards are there in America? How many wizards worldwide? What's the logistics of the wizarding world? Like, how does that even work? And so today what we're going to do is we're going to try to figure that out. I think J.K. Rowling was brilliant, and she did a great job making sure that, she gave us enough details in the book that it felt satisfying, but she withheld enough information that there were no glaring contradictions that popped up in terms of well, over here you said this and over here you said that. Because it's just the world that she created is too big and too sprawling to get every little detail right if you're too specific. So she was just vague enough in some areas and specific enough in other areas that we felt satisfied, but at the same time, we couldn't pin her down on anything, which is brilliant. I mean, brilliant author. None of the logistics got in the way of the story. It only enhanced it. But still, we're super fans. If you're a super fan of Harry Potter, you're going to love this video. I love talking about this. Hopefully you're not scared of math. Here's the thing. There's going to be a little math. Not a lot of math, just a little math. The spreadsheet's going to do the math for us. We're just going to look to see what it did, and I'll share the spreadsheet later. So when you think about okay, how many wizards are there in the world, the best place to start is where you have data. And so what we're going to look at is, we're going to start with how many students are at Hogwarts, because that's where we've got the most data. Now, if any of you have followed the issue, it's been a debate on the internet for a long time. How many students exactly are there at Hogwarts? Nobody knows. In an interview one time, J.K. Rowling said there were about 1,000 students at Hogwarts, and most people who have looked at the book and try to figure it out from the book come up with a number of about 280. And so I'm not going to weigh in on that debate and try to settle it, because I don't think it can be. But I'm just going to show you each one here. Don't worry about this stuff down at the bottom right now. That'll come up later. It's scary looking, but it's really not that scary. So this number 5 here, 5 males, is the starting point for the 280 thing, right? Because you have Harry, you have Ron, you have Seamus, you have Dean, and you have Neville. And those went in 1991, when Harry first came to school, right? 1991, because obviously in the second book we learned that Nearly Headless Nick was celebrating his 500th death day on October 31st, 1992. And it said that he died in 1492, so that means it must have been 1992 that he was celebrating that death day. We also, from the 7th book, learned that James and Lily died in 1991, and 1981. And since the first book takes place 10 years later, that puts it at 1991. And so we know that 1991 through 1997 is the time frame for these Harry Potter books, and I guess maybe 98 is when the 7th one finishes up. But it started in 97. And so we know that the time frame there, and so all the numbers that I have of like, Great Britain's population, world population, we're basing everything off in 1991 when Harry first came to school. But in 1991, there were 5 male Gryffindors. We know that pretty well for a fact. It seems very unlikely that there were male Gryffindors that weren't mentioned. And if you just assume that, okay, that's the average size for a single gender, for a single house, for a single year, then there's 10 females as well, total of 10 first-year Gryffindors, meaning 4 houses, so you have 40 first years overall, and then of course 40 times 7, you get the 280, and so 280 students at Hogwarts. There might be more, there might be less. There's a popular theory going on online that this year was unnaturally low because of some of the Wizarding Wars, because of the rise of Voldemort, 10 years earlier, that this was sort of an unnaturally small class, and that's possible. You also have the J.K. Rowling in an interview said there's about 1,000 students at Hogwarts. So, this case, you go back, you start over here at 1,000, which is your starting number, and then you do some division to get the rest of it, that there's about 143, give or take, students in each year. That's combined all 4 houses, and about 35 or 36 in each house in each year. So, the Gryffindor the Gryffindor first years in 1991, there would have been about 36 boys and about 36 girls if it had been a normal-sized Hogwarts class, which clearly it wasn't for whatever reason. So the point here is not really to debate these. They both have sort of their merits. And if you think about the 280, that works really well for thinking about like class size and things like that, because, in a class, you would have 10 students in a class, an average class, or if you had 2 different houses together, you'd have 20 students, which is a perfectly manageable class. And so, like potions, you have the Slytherins and the Gryffindors are together, and that would just be a group of about 20 people or so. So that seems really likely. In Goblet of Fire, talking about the 1,000 student hypothesis, it's mentioned that the 4 house tables are taken away and they're replaced by 100 tables that all seat about 12 people, right? So 1,200 person seating capacity. You figure that there were some guests at the time, some people from, Beauxbaton and Durmstrang. So, 1,000 sort of works really well with that assumption. Also, when you consider one of the Quidditch matches, it's mentioned that there's about 200 people over in the Slytherin end. So if there were about 1,000 students at Hogwarts, you'd expect that there's 250 Slytherins at the school. So, maybe some of them didn't feel like going to the Quidditch match, and 200 seems pretty well in line with about 1,000 students at Hogwarts. Anyways, like I said, we're not going to settle this debate. We're just going to look at both of them and what the implications are and get started. Now, the biggest thing is, I think one of the big clues, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but you have in the 7th book, you have Professor Lupin talking about, I guess he's not a professor at the time, but he's talking about how Voldemort has just made Hogwarts attendance mandatory. And the kids, Harry, Ron, Hermione, they're like, well, wasn't it mandatory before? And he said, no, nearly, this is the key part, nearly every witch or wizard has had their kids educated at Hogwarts, but it was never compulsory. It was always voluntary. So nearly every, what does that mean? Well, I think we can safely assume that nearly every is well in excess of 50%, right? And really, I would think well in excess of 75%. 3/4 is not nearly every. Something more like, I think 90% would be a good approximation of nearly every. So if you have 9 out of every 10 witches and wizards, in Great Britain end up going to Hogwarts, I think you're pretty much in the ballpark of what Lupin means when he says nearly every. Now, he could be wrong, but it's the best info we have to go off of. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to base off the class size of a given Hogwarts year. We'll try to figure out how many past, present, and future Hogwarts students were alive in 1991, meaning how many people, older than 17 that had gone to Hogwarts, how many people at Hogwarts, and then how many people, ages 0 to 10 that would be future Hogwarts students, and then assume that number represents 90% of the total wizarding population. Well, how are we even going to do that? And that's where, if you want to direct your attention to this big, scary field here, historic interim life tables, Great Britain, based on the years 1991 to 1993. That's our time frame. We're thinking about 1991. It actually extends over here, so you see the males. There's females over here. You see here, I took this from the Office of National Statistics. So just straight up, this is like as official of figures as I could find. And the one that we're wanting to look at here is this little column marked LX. This is the life expectancy. So in other words, what we're looking at here is the ages over here, age 0, that means at birth. So this is for every live birth of every 100,000 live births. This is how many people do we expect to still be alive at each age. So unfortunately, there's some infant deaths. So at age 1, we only expect 99,242 out of every 100,000 live births to still be alive. Excuse me. Same thing as we go down the line at age 2, and then it just keeps getting smaller and smaller until you see at age 100, we only expect 228 people out of our original 100,000 to still be alive. Now, it only goes up to age 100. That's a little disappointing. Although, here in the United States, we have Social Security publishes some statistics. So just to be sure, I ran the same numbers for them. This doesn't look as pretty, but this is the same thing. And it goes up to 119. So I ran the same numbers, and really they're only about 2 people off, because you don't expect for there to be a lot of really old people alive. And in the numbers that we're talking about with the Wizarding World, it's so small that really the differences are insignificant if we're looking at, through age 100 versus through age 120 or something like that. Of course, there's some stuff that comes up there. What about like Nicholas Flamel? He's really old. And okay, he's an outlier. But, really, there's some, pretty old witches and wizards out there, but nothing that really suggests that, like, there's just like a ton of like 500-year-old wizards. So I think we're pretty safe, assuming more or less that a wizard has sort of the normal life expectancy that a muggle has. So here's what I did. Over here, if you look over at the left, past, present, and future Hogwarts students. So what I did is I made age 11 my starting point, and then I worked backwards from there, and then also forwards from there. So you see that the 20 over here represents the 20 up here. You have 20 male students in 1991. So in order for there to have been 20 male students in 1991, you would have expected that 11 years earlier, 20.21 males had been born. Now obviously that's not possible, but we're just doing the best we can, doing averages here. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom here, after all 100 years have been accounted for, we get a number of 3,000, and we'll call it 91. 3,091 past, present, and future Hogwarts students. So if you take that and you assume that that's 90% of the total wizarding population based on Lupin's nearly every number, we get a total wizarding population of 3,434 wizards in Great Britain in 1991. Now, this is just a Google search. I looked up, well, how many people were alive in Great Britain in 1991? And the scale looks a little off because this one doesn't have a decimal on it, but that's 55,846,718 people. Now, what I did here, and we'll talk about this world population stuff a little bit later, I came up with like a wizarding percentage, like what percentage of the people are wizards. But let's talk about some of the weird implications of this, because this is kind of a little bit unexpected that you'll have such a low population, and it has huge implications like for things like pro sports. Like think about Quidditch for a second. Okay, so look at this table here. Pro sports, the Wizarding World versus the real world. One of the things that comes up with this set of numbers is just how absurdly easy it is to become a pro athlete in the Wizarding World. So here's what I mean. In the real world, and this is the highest level of soccer, or Great Britain terminology, football, the Barclays Premier League, There's 20 pro clubs, right? There's 11 starters on each club. That means that at the highest level of football in Great Britain right now, there are 220 starters. We're not even talking about the whole team. We're just talking about the best of the best, the starters, out of a population of 55 million, meaning 0.0004% of the people are pro athletes. So sorry, very few of you have a shot of being a pro athlete in Great Britain. Now consider the Wizarding World. Let's just assume that there's the same number of clubs, 20 clubs. I mean, we can't get too much smaller than 20. If you start getting at numbers like 3, what's the point of having a pro league of 3 teams? So, I mean, there might be less. There might be 10 teams. There might be 15 teams. But let's just assume there's the same 20. And since we're making all kinds of assumptions, why the heck not? The number of starters on a Quidditch team is 7. So we have a slightly lower number of total starters. 140 people are starting for a pro Quidditch team in Great Britain, but the population is much smaller. Instead of 55 million, we have 3,000, meaning a whopping, and I mean a whopping 4% of the wizarding population in Great Britain are starters on a professional Quidditch team. Now, here's the thing. If you go back over here to the to how many people we expect are alive at each age, obviously these 3-year-olds over here are probably not pro Quidditch players. Same thing with the 99-year-olds. You figure that, starting at age 17, you maybe can become a pro Quidditch player. And I just say 17 because that's the year that wizards come of age. So, I mean, let's, just for the sake of, talking about it, usually you don't expect to see people playing past age 40. Sometimes it happens, but it's rare. So you're only competing, if you're going for a spot on a Quidditch team, against people ages 17 through 40, meaning you're only going up against about 951 other people that might want that job, meaning that's an absurd 14.71% of 17 to 40-year-olds get to become professional Quidditch players in Great Britain. That's not even the most amazing part. Based on those numbers, it's actually harder to make a house team at Hogwarts than it is to become a pro athlete, right? Think about it. If you have 28 Quidditch starters out of 280 students, that's 1 out of every 10. That's a full 10% of Hogwarts students get to become starters on their house team. Now, that's an absurdly high amount, but it's less than the 14.71% of 17 to 40-year-olds that become pro athletes. So when you think about it, somebody like Cormac McLagan, who had 1 start and was a disaster, or Dean Thomas, who made the team as an alternate, they have a really realistic shot at becoming pros, especially because probably not every starter on a Gryffindor or a Hogwarts house team ends up becoming a pro. Some pursue other careers. Maybe they become an Auror or something like that. So you're left with very few people to compete against, and very, very likely that you will become a pro athlete. Now, before we go on, talk about the what it looks like with 1,000 students at Hogwarts. Let's just talk for a second. A bigger mystery, and this is where you get into some crazy logistics, might be how the Wizarding World is even able to support sports teams in general, right? So think about it. You have 3,500 rounding up wizards in Great Britain. You're not exactly filling up 100,000 person stadiums, are you? So you're not getting any revenue from attendance, or hardly any revenue from attendance, especially since probably not everybody shows up to every game, and you have 20 teams, so you have something like each team has a few hundred fans maybe. So okay, you have merchandise, right? I mean, we know that Ron had like a Chudley Cannons hat, or Cho had like a Tornadoes badge. So clearly they're selling merchandise. But again, if you only have a few hundred fans at your team, I mean, you need to sell a lot of merchandise, or your merchandise better be really expensive. Maybe the best clue for how the pro sports teams actually make money is in the 4th book, where you see the Quidditch World Cup, which does have a 100,000 person stadium. But so there's advertising in that. So okay, maybe that's where the Wizarding World gets all of their revenue, is through advertising. But why would you want to advertise to a stadium that's half empty? We don't have any indications that the Wizarding World has televisions. We know that there's the Wizarding wireless network, the radio, but we never see any indications that they have televisions. Maybe there are televisions, although Arthur Weasley seems like he really doesn't know very much, even though he's one of the ones who has an unhealthy interest in muggle things and batteries and spark plugs and things like that. He doesn't have a very good understanding of how it all works. So it's hard to think about, like, how would you have television and it never be mentioned? Although I guess maybe that's what it is, and they're just hoping like everybody in Great Britain is watching every match or something like that. I don't know. That's not the only problem faced by a population as small as 3,000 people. So you think about it, you have 3,500 people, and a pretty large chunk work for the Ministry of Magic. A pretty large chunk probably work at St. Mungo's. You have entrepreneurs like Fred and George. You have people who have ice cream shops and bookstores and different things like that. And you have people like the Malfoys who just seem to have family money and don't really need to work. So your workforce must be incredibly tiny. Like, where does the infrastructure come from? Like, where's all the food coming from? Like, you think about it, in the 7th book, it's mentioned that food is one of 5 principal exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration. So you can't just conjure it out of thin air. Now, I guess it is mentioned that you can multiply it if you've got some of it. But, well, what do you just have people, like, sitting there multiplying food? And if you do, like, why don't you just go and feed all the starving muggles? And I guess, there is, in the first book, Harry asks Hagrid about stuff like that, and he says, well, they just want magical solutions to all their problems. But most of our problems aren't a big deal. Hunger's a pretty big deal. Like, couldn't you figure out a way to surreptitiously, get the food to us, just kind of magically multiply it and then, surreptitiously, secretly distribute it? I don't know. Anyways, it's also very hard to understand how there can be celebrities. Like, in the second book, you have Gilderoy Lockhart is a celebrity. He's a wizarding celebrity. But at 3,500 people in wizards in Great Britain, everybody kind of knows everybody else. And you get that sense sometimes in the books that most people know most other people. So how do you have one guy who just, achieves this, like, reverential status? And, I mean, really, he only has much less than 3,000 fans, because we know that there's some people, like Hermione or like Mrs. Weasley, who are like very infatuated with him. But then there's, for every one of those that we hear about, there's quite a few people like Harry and Ron, the Weasley twins, who just do not care for the man at all. So you wonder, like, what is going on there that you have a celebrity like that? In the 5th book, Arabella Figg mentions that, of course, she knows Dumbledore. Who doesn't know Dumbledore? And so he's one of the most famous wizards out there, but everybody seems to know him personally. So that's a little weird. One thing that I wonder about is Ollivander. Did you guys ever think of this? You get the impression from the books that Ollivander is the only one who sells wands in all the UK. And now when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because there aren't a lot of customers to go around. So think about it, less than 3,500 people, but most of them aren't buying wands in a given year. It's really only those, 40 or so 11-year-olds that are coming into school that are buying wands. And then you figure there's a couple people that, maybe broke their wand, lost their wand, whatever, need the wand repaired or something like that. But you figure he has maybe 50, maybe 60 clients in a year? Like, how is he making his money? Wands must be pretty expensive, which I guess makes sense, right? They're pretty important in the wizarding world. The goblins seem to really want some wands, so they must be hard to get, hard to make. But those 50 or 60 sales a year not only have to cover his whole salary, but also his overhead, because he's got some prime real estate that he is working with. So really hard to understand how he stays in business. Really hard to understand how anybody stays in business. Anyways, though, moving past the logistical problems and going over, if we have 3,400 witches and wizards in Great Britain at the time, I got this number, 55 million. I looked up on Google. It actually gave me for the UK, which is slightly different than Great Britain. So you subtract Northern Ireland, and you kind of get at the number. But anyways, you just divide this number by this number, and convert it to a percentage, multiplying it by 100, and you get a number of 0.0061% of people in general we would expect to be wizards. So if you just Google the world population in 1991, 5.4 billion people, that gives you a worldwide wizarding population of 332,611. What makes it that crazy is, you had the World Cup in the fourth book, and I've already mentioned it had a 100,000 seat stadium, which means that probably about a third of the entire wizarding population across the world was at this World Cup. So, the first several times I read Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, I'm like, man, how unrealistic is that they were lucky enough to get tickets? Like, even with Mr. Weasley's connections, like, how lucky is that? And I think I maybe was thinking about that wrong. I think it was maybe more like, oh, of course they went, because not most people, but a third of all people went. It's absurdly, ridiculously easy, apparently, to get tickets to the Quidditch World Cup under this model of populations. But this isn't the only one, so let's talk about assuming there are 1,000 students at Hogwarts. So just skip right to the bottom here, because we've already kind of looked at some of this stuff. And you have 11,024 current, previous, or future Hogwarts attendees, meaning we'd expect the wizarding population in Great Britain to be about, 12,249.12. This time we get a ratio of a percentage of wizards of 0.0219. So this means that based off the world population, we get a substantially bigger number, 1,186,361 witches and wizards living among us. We are over 1,000 people. We're over 1 million people, which is pretty cool. So ironically, I think this probably makes the wizarding world a little bit more believable in terms of the scale and the scope and the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about some of the issues. But probably, I don't know if you agree with me here, I think it makes Hogwarts a little bit more unrealistic in certain ways. Like in certain senses it makes sense, because it seems like it's pretty crowded, and that in the sixth book you get the sense that there's these first years that Harry and Ron don't really know, and it'd be much easier to know everybody if there were 280 students at Hogwarts. Much harder to know everybody if there was 1,000. And you get the sense that they don't really know everybody. But at the same time, it's like the class sizes. If we scroll back up, you're talking about on average, and it seems like Harry's class is smaller than this, but you'd have about 36 or 37 students in a class. Or if you had, two, like if you had the Gryffindors and the Slytherins together, you're up over maybe 70 students. Now, I'll say this, that would really make Snape's ability to call a class to attention using just a whisper really, really impressive. Like, if you can make 70 people stop talking by whispering, that's a heck of a lot more impressive than making 20 people stop talking by whispering. Also, there'd be 250 students in each house. So that's kind of a crowded common room, which, sometimes that makes sense. Some of the Quidditch, celebrations seem to be pretty, ruckus, and, I think 250 people being crammed in there makes sense. But, in general, it's like, man, it'd be hard to fit all those people in the common room. So, hopefully they're doing other stuff. Anyways, based on this new figure, though, if we extrapolate, and so like I did some calculations using, the U.S. population in 1991, and if we apply the ratio, there'd be about 49,000 wizards and witches spread throughout the country. Maybe a lot of them are in Salem, Massachusetts. What's crazy is I went to a college where there's about 50,000 people. So that means there were more people at my college than there would be wizards in my whole country. This would mean, though, that the size of the wizarding world, to give you some idea, comparison, the size and the scope, the wizarding population as a whole, under this rubric, across the world, would be about the size of Dallas, Texas. Or to go across the pond for a comparison, maybe like Birmingham or something like that. Whereas using the 280 model, where instead of having 1 million wizards, if we go back here, instead of 1 million wizards, it was about 300,000 wizards. You'd get a size that's roughly comparable to the city here in the U.S. of Anaheim, California, what it was in 1991, or to go back across the pond for a comparison analogy, the London borough of Newham. So, really, really small either way. Like, you're talking about there are cities in the world, in either case, that are about as big as the worldwide wizarding population. So it's a small subset of people. Any way you look at it, whether you assume 280 students at Hogwarts or about 1,000 students at Hogwarts, using the assumptions that we've made, it's really hard to fathom how this wizarding world exists and functions. So I don't fault, like I said, J.K. Rowling for that at all. And Joe, if you're watching this, I think you did a brilliant job. Not that you'd ever watch this. That would be so cool if J.K. Rowling watched this. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to tweet it to her. Oh my gosh. I would so nerd out if J.K. Rowling retweeted this. Let me ask anybody who watches this a favor. I'm going to tweet J.K. Rowling a link to this video. I'll put a link to my tweet so that you can find it. Could you please just, retweet it, like it, whatever, try to get J.K. Rowling's attention to get her to watch this video. I would love for her to just say, wow, good job, I appreciate all your work and how you nerded out over this and how much you love Harry Potter. The cool thing about the internet, without the internet, I don't think there'd be any chance of me ever getting J.K. Rowling's attention. But Joe, if you do end up watching this, thank you so much for watching this. That's amazing. Like I said, I love the books. I plan to keep reading them. I plan to read them to my children. This is just like a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I have so enjoyed nerding out over this. So to all the rest of my viewers, thank you so much for watching. If you're still with me, I can't believe you made it this far. You just super nerded out to listen to me talk with a spreadsheet, on the screen with a bunch of numbers and some math and some hardcore geekery going on. So thank you so much for sticking with me. If you liked it, please subscribe, and I promise you I'll come out with some more fun Harry Potter videos. I come out with other videos on this channel too, but I'll get you some more Harry Potter videos. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.